just want to thank AHCA or AHCA, they're better pronounced. I'm not sure if it's AHCA, it sounds a bit like HARCA, as Heads of Asbestos Coordination Authority, which is just people have heard of the Heads of Asbestos Coordination Authority. So it's a state-based authority that deals with asbestos coordination right across the state. So it's got the EPA, SafeWork, Local Government New South Wales, Ministry for Health, Dust Diseases Authority, Department of Industry, those sort of players sitting on the board. And that was formed as part of the Ombudsman's report back in 2009 in regards to asbestos and the coordination and how each agency in New South Wales dealt with asbestos right through its life cycle. And that Ombudsman's report came out in 2010. It was quite damning on New South Wales government in regards to the agencies and then how they and local government and how they dealt with asbestos. And one of the the suggestions or recommendations from that report was to put together a coordinated authority, and so that stemmed from that. So that's where we are today. And I suppose I'll just lead on to what John and Nigel were saying about DAC, which is the Demolition Asbestos Demolition Asbestos Consultative Committee. It's been going for a long time now, made up of SafeWork, the EPA, Local Government New South Wales, the CFMEU, Electrical Trades Union, Plumbers Union, AHCA, so the Asbestos Removal Contractors Association, the MBA, and now AHCA. So it's a forum where SafeWork can sit at a table with industry, with people like you now today, can sit there and hear the concerns of industry and where we can be doing better. I mean, at the end of the day, legislation, the way I see it, and the guidance material that's written all comes from industry and it all comes from experts like yourself in how it's formed and how it ends up coming together. So a voice in such an association like this I think is fantastic. We've got around about 400 licensed asbestos assessors, so I'm not sure how many may be a part of this, but it is a large number now, and it's may continue to grow. But something that it's a voice that everyone can be on board and deal with, sort of thing. So I haven't got a presentation as such today that you're going to see, so I just more want to just talk to some notes. I really thank you for the opportunity to come. It's good as part of being a regulator to come out and talk and share knowledge and understanding in our interpretation of the legislation, and obviously hear your concerns as well. Asbestos in general it's a highly political subject, as we know. It's on the radio all the time. There's certain shock jocks that are on the radio that talk about asbestos all the time. It's in the media in regards to illegal dumping of asbestos, councils not doing the right thing in regards to management of asbestos. You're hearing that all the time. It's also the fear of the unknown in the general public. So people who are mum and dad who are living next door to a demolition or a removal, asbestos removal that's going on, what they don't know, they don't know. And the first people they call is generally the SafeWork regulator or the local council. So we seem to be always at the start of that. And when our licence holders are out there, they've got licences and do the work right, but at the end of the day, if you put a sign up, you're going to remove asbestos, you're going to get complaints and end up coming through to us. And we all know someone who's been affected by asbestos in some way. I'm not sure about you. I've been affected by asbestos myself personally in regards to my father. My father was just 2 years ago was diagnosed with mesothelioma. He worked as a fitter and turner in the Dell Power Station up near Muswellbrook in the 70s and the 80s. It was 41 years from the day that he started there till the day of diagnosis. So asbestos-related diseases take a long time to come to fruition. He went through fortnightly chemotherapy, very, very radical to start with. He ended up having a procedure using a needle to remove fluid from his pleural cavity. He then had a pleuridosis where they put talcum powder inside you to stop the production of the fluid. He then had a pleuroectomy, which involved the removal of his left lung. He had his diaphragm, his heart lining all removed, and all that was last year. Since last year he's been going well. He's travelled even up to Arnhem Land just recently. He came back just a few weeks ago now, and just last week he's now, through further testing, just a regular checkup. It's now, the mesocells have now spread to his sternum, his ribs, his liver, his hip and his head. So we're all touched by it. What that leaves with me is something that, you know, I know he's going to die soon. There is no doubt about it. There is no cure for mesothelioma. But it gives me the passion and the drive to keep wanting to have best practice, work hard, and you know, and work in a forum like we are here today. So I just want to let everyone know here today that as part of my role as the Assistant State Inspector at SafeWork in the A&D team, we're open to business, we're open to suggestions, we're open to working with everyone, and if the things need to be changed, guidance needs to be fixed up, that's what we want to do. So we're going from there. Asbestos in soil. Well, as you know, it only poses a health risk if asbestos fibres are breathed in. While it's in non-friable, it's in sound, good condition, and it's in the soil, it's a negligible risk. We all know that, whether it's on the wall of a house or whether it's in the soil, same thing. When it's friable asbestos, it's a different story. It's more dangerous, it's more chance of becoming airborne and being breathed in. Guidance on this in regards to safe work is we've got the legislation under Chapter 8 of in the Work Health and Safety Regulation, in particular Clause 4195 that everyone may be know about, and I'll talk about that later. Managing asbestos in soil or on soil guide that we have, it's a 2014 document. Is everyone aware of the safe work guidance material on that? What do you think? It's pretty short on information, would you say? Could do. It gives some idea, but it refers to NEPM a lot. And everyone's aware of NEPM, so you've got Schedules B1 and B2 in regards to NEPM. It talks about in there, you know, anything that's less than 7 millimetres is considered asbestos fines. Is that friable asbestos when it refers to our legislation? And this is where all this, I think what you mentioned before, Nigel, is all up in the air. And then you've also got the code of practice, how to safely manage asbestos, and also how to manage and control asbestos in the workplace. And in the how to safely remove asbestos, we've only got really one page on asbestos in soil, and again that just refers us back to NEPM. As you know, codes of practice are guidance material. They're not called up into legislation, not like previously in our old legislation where the codes of practice were called up into legislation and you had to do what they are. They're now considered guidance material, but they still work the same in the sense of you either have to be doing what the code of practice says, because that's minimum standards. If not, you need to be doing better than that. And that's how it should be read in regards to that. Sources of asbestos in soil. Where does it all come from? On-site building waste. So when they're doing removals, former demolitions and removal sites where poor demolition practices occurred. And everyone's got a story of how poor the demolitions used to be done over the time where they'd bury asbestos on site and then build over the top of it. Uncontrolled fill. Many years ago when asbestos wasn't banned, a fill with asbestos was able to be transported around and used in fill holes. Typical of that is the James Hardie legacy sites all around the Parramatta and Granville area, where we've got large amounts of friable asbestos as well as non-friable asbestos being contaminated in the ground and left under residences, under footpaths, in parks, you name it, it's there, and it was put there as a result of filling holes or raising the earth and things like that up. Fires, illegal dumping, redundant services, you name it. This is where why our soils are contaminated with asbestos. How do we deal with it? There's three general ways we deal with it. So it's managing it in situ. So we're either going to cap it, mark a layer, 500 millimetres usually the minimum amount of soil, clean soil that goes over the top of it. That's generally, and I would suggest, the best way of dealing with asbestos if we can. But that depends on what's going on that particular site. Is it going to be a development? Are we doing a 6-storey car park underneath and such, and different footings? Other side is a way of treating it on site. So we're hand picking it, tilling it and screening it. This is generally non-friable removal, asbestos in soil. It's not related to friable removal, and generally it's a low, shallow contamination, and there's not a lot there, and it can easily be picked out and move forward. And after that, you'd have a remediation action plan in regards to and managing of how we're going to move forward in regards to an unexpected fines procedure, for example, something like that, to how we'd move forward. And finally, you've got removal off site, which is obviously the most expensive, very costly. It involves licence holders, it involves site assessors, licensed asbestos assessors for the removal and for the air monitoring. Huge costs, and for us it then determines, well, what is the licence holder type that should be doing that work? Are they a Class A licence holder, a Friable licence holder, or are they a Class B licence holder? And that's where I want to move into with the issues that we're facing ourselves at the moment. We talked about on that slide, or Nigel showed the picture on the slide of the hygiene reports that came through in that last month. And it was 90 hygiene reports, I think the number was. So what's happening now in the asbestos removal space, and it has been happening for a little while now, is any asbestos removal in soil that is notified to us that involves either a Class A or a Class B licence holder who wants to remove a non-friable asbestos and use non-friable controls, must have an associated hygiene report that comes with it. So it's an independent report from a licensed asbestos assessor, a hygienist, and I'll talk a bit more about some other issues that we have in regards to what the competencies are. It needs to come with the notifications for us to be satisfied that that site has been independently assessed, that site history has been assessed, and we're satisfied that it is a non-friable removal job and we can have non-friable controls. Because the big difference in here is if it's friable or non-friable. If you've got friable controls, you're looking at having a working decontamination unit, a water management system on site. Everyone's wearing full face minimum P3 respirators. You've got control and clearance, air monitoring going on the whole time, and you've got a licensed asbestos assessor undertaking that clearance inspection compared to a competent person. Compared to if it was non-friable and spoil, you'd have a half-face respirator would be sufficient in regards to doing that removal. There is no decontamination unit or water management system on site. It's generally a dry decontamination area where they're moving. So the controls are greatly different. Obviously you can't have negative pressure for an asbestos removal soil site. It's too large and that doesn't work. But every other control for friable needs to be in place. And that's why it's important to us to make sure that the work that is being done by a Class B licence holder or by a Class A licence holder is non-friable work, and we get that from that report. Also, they've got to notify 5 days before. Everyone's aware that it isn't a 5-day notification period. We're always open to that in regards to a waiver, and they'll report it on that thing as well. And a waiver is something where a licence holder has notified and then they put in a request to say, can we start early, can we start 2 days early because this is our issue. It's an unexpected find, it's going to slow up works, we've got things in place, we've got independent hygienist or licensed asbestos assessor on site, can we move forward? And they're things that we will assess and we will look at agreeing to, and that happens quite regularly as well. I think there was 44 on that particular type. With the hygiene reports though, or soil assessment reports, whatever we want to call them, what we're not getting a lot of is they're not determining whether it's non-friable or friable removal. And that could be for a number of reasons. The reports come through, they're called waste classification reports, inspection reports, remediation action plan, site investigation assessment reports. That's all good.
That's it.
I can still see. And what we're getting a lot of in these reports, and in particular into a waste classification report, it's more about the presence versus absence. Have we got asbestos there? That's all that's being reported. It is asbestos. It has been reported. It has to go as a special waste. Well, there are EPA requirements in regards to how it's dealt with, sort of when it goes off site. For us, and our interest is whether it's non-friable or friable. So I'd ask all who do those site assessments and do those reports to have that in mind when you're writing those reports, or have those discussions with whoever has engaged you to make sure that they're aware that those sort of things, because these reports will end up for us to review, that sort of information is in there. The reports need to clearly determine that it's ACM, or the potential, even if there's a potential for friable asbestos, it needs to determine that and tell us that there is a potential on the site. And that comes down to the site, the preliminary site investigation or the desktop study. So what a lot of the reports we're not getting is people going out there and doing a proper desktop study analysis of that particular site. So they're not looking for what the previous or current land use was. What was the activities that were on that site? Where's the potential for asbestos contamination? Where could it come from? What were the building and construction types that were on there? Looking at aerial photographs, they work really good in regards to the legacy sites, and that was how we picked up a lot of the James Huddy legacy sites in and around the Parramatta and Granville area. You could see over the years where the site would change, and you could see that fill come in. And then also looking at the future use of the site, which is a big one. So what are we going to be doing on the site? Is there going to be excavations? Is there footings? How far are we going down to dig down for these footings to determine what we're doing there? So it's really critical that the site history and the future use of the site are critical factors in determining the degree of the investigation and the identification to investigate and assess asbestos in the context of that particular site. So it's really critical. So I really ask those that are doing that to really look at that site history and the previous and proposed use of the site in determining how you're determining that you're coming up that it's a non-friable or friable. And an example might be, there's lots of wide roadening going on, road widening going on at the moment everywhere sort of thing. And we've got a report, and they want to do a report that goes for the 5 kilometres of the width of the road, and they've looked at one particular area and they say, oh, that's going to be the same for the next 5 kilometres. What does everyone think of that? I mean, how can we accept that? It's ridiculous, isn't it? So it needs to be broken down into the particular area where they're doing the removal. Because on that particular wide roading project, there might have been industrial areas on one section, the next might have been residential and so forth. So we really need to knuckle that down. I'll get back onto the competency of the assessor. So this comes up a little bit as well. In NEPM, for example, a person has acquired through training, qualification or experience, knowledge and skills to identify, investigate and assess asbestos in the context of the site. That's what the competency expectations are of someone who's doing this type of assessment. When we look at reports, we get people signing off saying they're a HSC consultant or an advisor, WHSC consultant advisor, occupational hygienist, licensed asbestos assessor, hazmat consultant. I mean, when we read a report, even a licensed asbestos assessor signing off, and I play devil's advocate here, a licensed asbestos assessor, what are they licensed to do? To do clearance inspections and issue clearance certificates for friable asbestos removal. Does that give them the competency to assess soil, do soil assessments for asbestos on sites? Maybe. How does that help us when we're trying to assess these sites? So what I say to that is, when you're doing the reports, can you list qualifications that you've got in regards to, if you've got a science degree in environmental science, put that down. If you've done training in soil assessments, or there's some sort of qualification or internal training that's been delivered and conducted by your company in regards to soil assessments, or peer reviews that might happen, list that in the report. And it can be done 2 ways. At the end of the report, when you sign, or it can even be up front in a report when you introduce yourself as the assessor, the competent person, and you go through and you tell the story about what your experience is and how it relates and why you're the person who can make me believe that this report is can be believed. The other thing that comes up a lot is a lot of sampling's being done of soil when it's not required. A lot of reports are coming through. Again, either they have or they haven't done their site history very well, and they're taking soil samples. They'll take 1 or 2 samples of non-friable bonded asbestos, and it'll be clearly say the size it might have been, 75 centimetres by 50 centimetres or 50 millimetres. Sorry. And then they'll take the same soil samples near that same region. And I question, why are we taking soil samples? NEPM doesn't tell us to take soil samples in that context. If the site history tells us that there was only ever residential properties there and there was only ever bonded asbestos, There's nothing that tells us at all about the potential for friable asbestos at that site. There is no need to take soil samples. And that's backed up by the guidance in the Managing Asbestos in Soil guide that we have in NEPM and also in the Code of Practice. Clause 4195. Has everyone heard of Clause 4195 of our regulation? Put up your hand. No one? No one at all? We've got one. So in our regulation, the Work Health and Safety regulation, it talks about soil that a competent person has determined does not contain any visible asbestos-containing material or friable asbestos. That's one. Or, if the friable asbestos is visible, does not contain more than trace levels of asbestos as determined in accordance with Australian Standard 4964. Interesting one, isn't it? So visible. What does visible mean in that particular site? So it doesn't contain visible ACM or friable asbestos to start with. Or if friable asbestos is visible, does not contain more than trace levels. This always gets confused in regards to how that's interpreted. The way it's interpreted by SafeWork is visible in the first instance means by the naked eye. So if you're going to site, you've done your site history and everything else like that, and you can't see any visible asbestos-containing materials, bonded asbestos, and you can't see any friable asbestos, so you're not seeing fibre bundles, you're not seeing weathered or damaged ACM that may be less than 7 mils, small fragments. If you're not seeing any of that, it's considered doesn't contain asbestos. But remember that's got the proviso of that you've done your site history inspection as well first. If there is a chance that the site history or the site activities that have occurred on the site preclude that the friable asbestos may be present, that's when you need to do soil sampling. When you do soil sampling, the NATA accredited laboratory under PLM and dispersion staining, that's when we're saying visible under that in that regard, so under the microscope. Is everyone happy with that? I think that seems to be confused a lot all the time, so this is something I wanted to end on there. So visible in the context can mean two different things in the same clause. Very messy, and maybe it's something that this particular group can look at and see if we can come up with a better definition, and it ends up being made legislation later on. Just one final note before I wrap up. I know I've only got 20 minutes. We've got a webinar coming up soon. When I say soon, before the end of the year, that's being developed on asbestos in soils, because we know it's a big topic. It's going to be done by Steve Mikolovsky, the State Inspector, and also with Dennis Clements, who's come on board as our new Inspector, I'm not sure if people know Dennis here today. He's came on as a new Inspector in the Asbestos and Demolition team. Years of work health and safety experience and environmental side of things. Years of experience in asbestos management and asbestos in soils in particular. So he's going to be involved in that work as well. And I'm going to put it out to AHCA to be involved in the delivery of that content and what that content should be, and getting feedback from members, from stakeholders and from others to help us put that together. So we really can come up with something really clear and definite, and really make it easy to understand what the expectations are of safe work. So become a member and have your voice heard. And that's all I wanted to finish on today. Any questions? I'm sure there must be some.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Dean Gleeson with Lend Lease Engineering, we do a lot of these road widening projects that you mentioned. My question relates more to the licensing component. In particular, asbestos in soil, obviously, if it's bonded and you've got operators of excavators, trucking dogs, that sort of thing, loading dirt under controlled conditions, letting down, that sort of thing. What's the regulator's stance on the licensing requirement of those operators?
Of the operators? That's a good question. So that comes up a fair bit actually as well. So it really comes down to the operator, is he going into the dirty area, into the contaminated zone, in the excavator, say for example, he goes in, he does his work, he gets cleaned and decontaminated, then comes back out, gets out of the truck. Doesn't need to have asbestos removal training as such. Still needs as minimum asbestos awareness training, and it still have to have as minimum as emergency procedure in regards to what happens if his machine breaks down. How's he going to get out? So he still needs PPE controls, PPE in his excavator in regards to how he gets out, and a procedure in regards to doing the work. But essentially, he doesn't need to have non-friable asbestos removal training or friable asbestos removal training in that sense. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, yeah, at the back.
Stephen here from GreenPlus. We get a similar questions as well. And that means if we just bury some confirmed non-friable contaminated stockpiles, bury it on the grounds, and then because the operator don't need license, that means it's not licensed work.
So just trying to get this right. You've got non-friable asbestos. That's all.
Bury on the containment on site.
Right here.
Is that because we don't have? It's not like a have to have a license or.
So we're not removing it. It's going to be.
No, so that
okay.
works. It's not considered just
Yeah.
removal, right? Or still considered as
It's a bit of a, I suppose, a hard one to answer, I suppose. It really depends on the circumstance, but I'd suggest good diligence and good practice would be to have a licence holder involved in doing that particular work. But I suppose it's really going to come down to what's involved in that. But as a minimum, there's got to be minimum training in regards to either asbestos awareness training, but in regards to doing that sort of work, I would think probably a licence holder.
Yeah.
It's hard to answer in particular. Yep.
In relation to that question and remark, I was trying to find out in the legislation. Oh, sorry, my name is Anna. I'm from the Wyong City Council. I'm an environmental consultant and as a material consultant too. But I was trying to find legislation, some information about that. And in the management asbestos in soil or soils,
yep.
there is one actually reference to handling, transporting and dealing with asbestos soils and removing.
Yeah.
That's the only mention that I could find, but everywhere else it talks about removal of asbestos and it needs to be class A, class A, removal.
Yeah.
And I actually came across a few situations where they tried to say, look, this is not removal. We do not need a license class A or class B because it's not removal. It's just transporting here to there.
If it's transporting it if it's moving it from one place to another, it's removal.
But on the same
Simple as
site,
that,
for example.
Yeah, no, even if it's on the same site, removing it from one place to another, that's removal. I mean, it comes down if it's just capping. I think the other question is more about if you're just capping what's there. So we've got a known contamination and we're just going to cap that with a geofabric layer and, we're going to do whatever we're going to do. I think that's probably a little bit murky in regards to that. Is that
But
right removal?
shouldn't the operators have the capability and knowledge to do that?
Yeah, still all of that. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So that's why I say good due diligence is you have licence holders do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Last question, I think I'm getting wrapped up here. Last question.
Yeah, hi mate. So Ben from Prensa. It seems like a common-ish remediation approach is happening, as you say, and in some cases it's actually excavating out like a containment cell, a specific engineered containment cell, and moving asbestos-contaminated soils into that cell.
Yeah.
And I guess it'd be interesting to get your take or the regulator's take on how that's not reusing asbestos on site, which is a prohibited activity.
Yeah. No, I've never heard of it. I've never even thought about it, to tell you the truth. It's reusing. No. I mean, to me, it's the best place for it is to stay on site where possible. We're not transporting it across jurisdictions or anything like that. It's the safest manner in way to do to deal with it. But no, I've never thought of it as reusing. Think about it. But I don't think you're reusing it in such a thing. It's just going from a hole to another hole. So I don't know if you call it reusing.
Just